Okay, so Borderlands 4 came out the other day, and I wasn't planning on doing a video on it just because I don't tend to do videos on new games. A lot of the time it's me returning to old ones. But because a lot of people seem to love the Borderlands series on the channel after doing a video on each main game, including the pre-sequel as well as the spin-off games like Tiny Tina, and I started playing it a few days ago. I would have probably played it a bit earlier on release day, but I was waiting on my new PC to arrive, which actually gave me the game for free, included with the 5080 graphics card, which is great to be honest, as of course games do run a lot smoother now, and just with the PC, just in general with the videos, it's a lot quicker to use editing software, for example. Now I did hear that the game wasn't fully optimized for PC yet, or at least on the launch day it definitely wasn't. I think it was quite hard to even get 50 frames per second, but I think they must have done an update here and there because it does seem to have fixed itself, or at least gotten a lot better now. I won't say it's perfect quite yet, as there's definitely the odd bug here and there I noticed, and of course just in general, I mean PCs are all different, so you could still witness some crashing or just a bit slower. I wouldn't say the bugs that I did encounter were anything game breaking though, and just from what I've heard, for anyone that's just waiting on the game's performance to be better, at least on PC, I think now is a good time to start. Now the new planet where the game does take place is called Kairos, I believe, which is split into 4 different regions which you navigate through, that being the Fade Fields, the Terminus Range, the Carcadia Burn and Dominion. And overall I actually quite like this setting in terms of just everything. It seems to be a mixture of everything we've seen in the other Borderlands settings, so it's not just focusing on like the Wasteland theme for example, but also a lot of that colour we saw in the 3rd game, and also like a sprinkle of sci-fi and just modern stuff. Of course it's a futuristic game, so there is going to be that, but just from what we've seen in all the games, it seems to be a mixture and just quite a variety, which I do like. It seems to also lean into a more free and just way more open world system compared to the other games, and just isn't as constricted with the story missions. And one of the things that stood out to me is how you actually traverse through the world, of course, but also in the combat as well. I mean, Borderlands has always been a fast paced, especially in the late game, but with some games I just wish there was a bit more in terms of the movement, whether that be traversing or actually in the combat. And of course I'll dive more into the gameplay after I touch on the Vault Hunters, but I just feel like there was way more to actually integrate into combat in terms of the movement, such as the jetpacks, the grappling hooks, which are a new addition and are very common to find. You can only use them when there's a prompt to do so, so it doesn't feel so much and it doesn't feel overly different, it's just something extra, as well as the air dashes and double jumps and sliding, which I think is such a simple but great feature for mobility. As I said, it just offers way more ways to use that inside of combat, like getting high ground or getting out the way to escape quickly with the grapple. And then traversing far distances, you of course have the vehicles to use, which I would personally say are a lot easier to control for the most part, but not always easy when you get caught on something by accident, let's say. They have a great boost to all of them and you can get from one point to another extremely quickly. And then fast travel can be used at all times on multiplayer to teleport to another player. I'd also mention I haven't actually played the game in full, I haven't completed it in any way. I'm probably about 10 or so hours into it, so I think I've had a good amount of time to really sink time into it. And this is mainly my first impressions of the game. And I may do like a more detailed and in-depth video later down the line, just with my later thoughts. So I'm not like near the end game at all. And of course it is quite different of a game when it gets into that. So let me know if you do want that. So in terms of the Vault Hunters this time round, we have a very good lineup, I'd say, and I genuinely think they're all on a very similar level, I'd say, and not one truly stands out as of yet. So there's Vex, which I chose, and she has Siren powers, meaning she can spawn and command minions of herself, as well as her own dog called Trouble, which I had on most of the time. And then there's Eamon or Armon, the Forge Knight, and he's a strong and tanky build, getting the name from his Forge skill, which equips an array of weapons, like the Molten Forge Hammer as an action skill, which is like a giant slam to the ground basically, as well as twinned Forge Axes. They can be used as melee when thrown, but deals Kyro and fire damage in one, so it seems to really rely on a lot of mixture of elemental elements. And in the main action skill, Forge Fist, which gains constant shield regen, bonus fire and increased movement speed all in one again. And then there's Harlow, and she's the Gravitaire, using all types of new tech and cool gadgets in her gameplay, like her Chroma or Halo Accelerator. She uses radiation damage a lot of the time and also has Entangle with her action skill, which shares gun damage and skill damage with other enemies. And Rafa, the Exo Soldier, using microgravity and electricity and corrosive elements, having a main overdrive when using action skills, gaining movement speed and increasing damage, and from what I've gathered, he seems to be the most agile and speedy one, and it has weapons like arc knives, which are extremely quick, and of course shock enemies as well. Now I want to go back to the combat side, and now that I've covered the variety of gameplay styles with the Vault Hunters, and just as an overall with the weapon and shooting mechanics, they all seem to be fine and feel quite solid to use, and in true Borderlands looter shooter fashion, there is tons to gather and find, and you definitely notice a difference when you find a really good one that you actually get to grips with and you like. Not to say that the base ones are bad at all in any way, as early on into the game there's some great ones to have fun with, so it doesn't feel like a grind to really, have fun. But it just seems like when you find a really good one that sticks, at least for me, you'll be using it for quite a while. And I think that makes it better because it can seem a bit overwhelming to some people if every single weapon is amazing and you're constantly switching your main one out after every gunfight. Now as I mentioned, this isn't fully into endgame, so who knows what weapons I haven't picked up yet. It's truly endless, and of course an aspect that the entire franchise has always done well at. And there's some returning gun manufacturers we've seen before, so Jacobs, Maliwan, Torg, and Vladov for example, and it seems like all of Vladov's are amazing and some of the best. But then Torgs are also great, where your gun gets thrown and explodes when reloading. But then also new ones have been added, like Ripper and Order as an example. I love the wacky features on some of the guns. Again, even early on into the game, you'll most definitely be using some weird combinations of a weapon, and that not only adds on to the fun and the variety of the gameplay, but also the visuals. I mean, there's some amazing effects and animations on many of these, with, rainbow colours on the paint jobs, as well as the gunfire, explosions, sparkles, fireworks, etc. But this is also mainly due to the elemental factors. So there's kinetic, incendiary, fire, Cairo, which is frost, shock, corrosive, being poison, and radiation. A cool thing I noticed is that if you're using Vex, then her pet will actually match the colour of your gun element you're using. Of course, it's not just the guns, but also the throwable items like the grenades and the throwing knives. There's this one legendary Q9 knife. If you keep hitting an enemy with it in a row, then it will build up your movement speed. But then again, like always, you can integrate the environment with combat. So there's traversing parts, as I mentioned, like the grapples and the air dashes, but also with the exploding barrels we always have to shoot with all the different elements. With some you can also pick up and throw to cause an explosion. And in terms of general exploration, and as I mentioned earlier, with how big the map is, there's a good amount to do when traversing through, alongside the main quest. So, the safe houses, which are quite easy to take down with the bounty, and you get some free loot. In terms of the story and the narrative, of course it's still going to be a similar plot of the Vault Hunters, but a common critique of the series is the over-reliance on the character's cringe humour, and especially coming off 3, which was very prominent in the Calypso twins, of course, the main antagonists. How could I forget? Which personally I hated. Now I'm not saying there's no cringe-worthy stuff in this game, but it feels like a very different vibe to what we've seen before, and that's mainly due to these type of characters not being included as much anymore. You don't have to listen to Claptrap talk for minutes on end, or characters from years ago showing their face all the time, and it just seems to be way more independent, let's say, on only the Vault Hunters this time round. But of course there's definitely familiar faces, which is always nice, like Claptrap, as I said, Zane and Moxie as well, etc. But they definitely don't rely on it this time round. Another thing about that, which I forgot to mention in the gameplay, is the tip jar, which you can use to gain legendary weapons as seen in previous games. But I don't know if it's a multiplayer issue or not, but for some reason my friend was getting continuous free weapons when tipping, and I basically got scammed for all my cash and got nothing. It might be like only the host player gets them, or it's a glitch, I don't know. Now going back to the main narrative, it's just the fact that yes, okay, it doesn't rely on the other characters as much, but the thing is, they don't make the main Vault Hunters and their general characters around them very memorable. And that's probably the repetitive issue we see here, where some people are easily bored by it and just not that connected, because I don't feel there's much build up to them and just much character development, or like a backstory or anything. And I think it's just going to be an issue with the whole series unless you're a die-hard fan and just love that sort of, I don't know, just the characters they are. But I think a big criticism I've seen online, and just me in general, is that yeah, the narrative does take it down a bit. Another thing is the UI system, which falls a bit, and I think it's just not clear enough. They again sort of went with a whole new system this time round, and it's not really like we've seen before. I can't even really describe it in my own words, but as you can see on the gameplay, you can sort of get a feel for it yourself and see how you think of this. You know, comment down below what you think. Personally, I've seen worse in video games, but I think it's just not clear enough, you know, especially with a game like Borderlands when there's tons of different, you know, gadgets and weapons and just small items to really focus on. It's just not clear, and it doesn't stand out at all, and it all just blends into one. And it's just, yeah, some moments when you click on the stats or you click on switching weapons out, there's just too much information on the screen, and sometimes it like blocks it out and stuff. But that's something that I'm not going to really focus on that much, and it could just be like a personal preference thing. But from what I've also heard online, that's another big issue. So as an overall, what do I think of Borderlands 4? In terms of me, I do enjoy it. I felt like it was a mixture of everything they've worked on. But again, like with the narrative, not really relying on the cringe stuff, sort of straying away from that, but maybe a bit too far away, so that it just feels a bit boring in general, because they don't replace that with like actually really good characters. The characters, the new ones that they're focusing on, are also not that special. But the thing with me is that the gameplay and the gunplay and, you know, the weapon system of Borderlands is what makes it, and that's definitely a highlight of this game, and it always is with all the games, and that's why I play them. And in my opinion, I'm not like a hardcore fan or a die-hard fan. I'm more of like a casual one, where if they sort of all just blend together, and that's always going to be the main reason why I play the games, and there's not a huge difference between them all. But for anyone that doesn't like the Borderlands series, of course you're not going to like this. You know, it's different, but it still feels the same, and that's why if you didn't like the others, you're not going to like this. But yeah, and I think, you know, with me, as I said, I'm a casual fan. I'm not really a biased fan either, and I hope this review does help for anyone that wants like an unbiased review. I just took it for how it is, and I think I had a fun time playing it. I think you will as well, if you like that sort of gameplay. And yeah, just as an overall, I think it's decent. It's a mixture of it all. It does feel quite fresh in terms of the gameplay, and the main thing is that I did have fun with it. And yeah, personally, I would say it's one that I do recommend, and that's coming from me. So if you did enjoy this video, then let me know by tapping that like button down below, and if you enjoy single player and multiplayer games as well, then you can subscribe to the channel if you're new, and I have multiple playlists on a selection of games. You can also support me any further by becoming a member of the channel at either level 1 or 2 to gain access to various perks. And that was Borderlands 4. I was going to say in 2025, but it released this year. But that was my review at the moment. As I said, I might do a later one down the line, but who knows. I hope you enjoyed it, and bye bye.